Thanks very much. My name is Duff Johnson. I'll tell you a little bit about myself in a moment. We're going to talk about ISO 14289, PDF UA, and what implementers need to know. First of all, a little bit about me. Actually, probably the very first thing I should say is a good introduction is that this presentation itself is not particularly accessible as delivered. And the reason for that is that I'm using Keynote. I'm using Keynote because I'm going to use a few animations to demonstrate a few facts about PDF in terms of, or to explain things visually in terms of how flow happens and to highlight certain objects. So the PDF version of this presentation will be an accessible PDF ready for distribution. However, the presentation I'm delivering right now is less than accessible. So I just, that was a good piece of text to cover up the fact that I had just scrolled this slide about myself, and of course I left the bullet at the bottom here to highlight the fact that you all should understand that even though I'm well aware I'm speaking to a room full of developers, I'm not a developer. I want you to understand that all up front. But I do know how to irritate developers, and so that is is one of my objectives in life, as it turns out. In this presentation, first I'm going to give you a little bit of background on PDF UA, where it came from, who created it, a fast introduction to sections of PDF UA, some examples, and we're going to take a look at a nice simple page to see the kinds of issues that the PDF UA is addressing. We're going to run through how developers should think about accessibility in electronic documents in general, and then a brief bit about going beyond PDF UA 1. First, let's introduce universally accessible PDF, and with a little background information. History of PDF UA starts right at 1993, PDF released by Adobe Systems. In 1999, WCAG 1.0 was published, the first iteration of web content accessibility guidelines. Adobe introduced tagged PDF with Acrobat 5 in 2000. In 2001, the U.S. government introduced Section 508 regulations that required that electronic documents be accessible when produced by the federal government, deployed on their websites, or commissioned from their contractors. In 2004, we started the AIM, an American organization that deals in standards for electronic content, started the PDF UA project. In 2008, PDF reference became ISO 32000, and in that same year, WCAG 2.0 was published. And since that time, PDF UA has became accepted as a draft standard and is now set to be published probably around July of this year as ISO 14289. The creators of PDF UA, they are the AIM organization, commercial software organizations, and many individual consultants. I've got some of the names on the board here, and of course the International Organization for Standards, ISO. A number of organizations have been involved, including Adobe Systems, of course, Microsoft, NetCentric, Design Science, Callus, Crawford Technologies, and a number of others. The audience for PDF UA, first and foremost, it's a completely technical document, so the audience is fundamentally software developers. In addition, PDF UA is important for those evaluating tools which claim to make accessible PDF files. Evaluating PDF readers which claim to consume PDF UA conforming files, and I'll tell you more about that in a minute. And of course, for those evaluating also assistive technology, which claims to consume PDF UA conforming files. One of the sad truths about assistive technology is that it's a pretty messy area. They're relatively, a lot of those vendors don't speak with each other too much. Interoperability and organizing this, the functionality of their software to deliver consistent experience between different platforms is something that just doesn't really happen very much. Interested end users, of course, and those who are advocating accessibility in electronic documents are also part of the audience for PDF UA, because PDF UA gives them a vehicle that they can go beat up their regulators and software vendors with to say, hey, we need you to improve the kind of tooling that you're making to support electronic documents. What is the purpose of PDF UA? First of all, to define accessible PDF, providing normative technical requirements for the accessibility features that do already exist in ISO 32000 Part 1. PDF UA is for files, viewers, and assistive technology. It's a standard that covers all three of those areas. So there are, what does PDF UA do in detail? Detailed technical requirements necessary for accessibility, but absent in 32000. 32000 provides the mechanics. In other words, it states what those are. It does not provide correct normative terms that would allow you to understand that this shall be done, that should be done, and this other thing may be done. It's a single, UA provides a single normative understanding of what constitutes accessibility in PDF technology and gives implementers a clear means of achieving, there's a typo, achieving WCAG 2.0 in the PDF context. Why is this necessary? While accessible PDF has been possible since 2000, there has been, since that time, a complete lack of a universal understanding on what might constitute accessibility in a PDF file. Some take the view that the content order is something that's crucial. Why do they think that? Well, lots of software can only consume the content order of a PDF file and knows nothing about the tags. That confusion is perpetuated in ISO 32000, which is relatively ambiguous about which features in terms of structuring content might be useful or desirable or important in accessibility. There are benefits for end users. Well, of course, there need to be benefits for end users, otherwise it's a useless exercise. The point of PDF UA is to enable a quality reading and navigating experience for users, to deliver high quality results on mobile devices, to improve text and content reuse, such as extraction to HTML when it's permitted by security settings, and to deliver high-quality text search results when used with conforming technology. For organizations, they're going to, if they implement PDF UA, they're going to find that they have enhanced communications with persons with disabilities, enhanced compliance with various accessibility laws and regulations that are emerging across the world, thus reducing their liability exposure. They'll get assistance in meeting their WCAG 2.0 requirements for their web content. They'll get guidance for software and document procurement, and verifiable performance with search engines, which is something, a dirty little secret right now, is that if you index PDF files with search engines, and those search engines don't understand tags, and they're indexing untagged PDFs, your chances of finding long strings that you're looking for are down to pretty much luck. Lastly, an additional benefit is that PDF UA will deliver eligibility for PDF A, conformance level A, which is pretty much the gold standard for archivable PDF file. A conformance level A archivable PDF A file is something that is also reusable and with content that's extracted down into the future. So the business case: government agencies are clearly require accessible information and communications technology. It's an ongoing trend in Canada and Australia and the United States and in Europe as well, of course. Other technologies might be easier to make accessible than PDF. Indeed, some technologies are intrinsically accessible compared to PDF, but many of those technologies can't, and Bill's going to tell us more about this later, but at the moment, many of these other technologies can't solve some of the same business problems as PDF. Solutions that depend on deliverables in PDF can't wait for regulators, attorneys, and consumers. It's something that you want to get in front of right now if you're developing these things. You might not, if you're a developer of PDF, have ever bothered much with Section 14, the interchange section of ISO 32000 Part 1, but you will be doing that soon, as the various agencies out there are increasingly requiring their software developers to deliver the solutions that are accessible. What about WCAG 2.0? Well, PDF UA does not attempt to replicate, replace, or otherwise interfere with WCAG 2.0 whatsoever. It does provide technical detail that would be necessary to implement in any PDF file in order to produce conformance with WCAG 2.0. WCAG 2.0's PDF techniques are not a substitute for PDF UA because they're not normative, they're technically insufficient. Okay, you won't find any reference to fonts, just to take one example, anywhere in the PDF techniques. And the techniques are characteristically implementation specific. They're about Microsoft Word, or they're about Adobe Acrobat. They're not actually about the PDF itself. There are now some code snips in there for some of the techniques, but those are fragmentary examples. And there are many, many, many use cases not covered in the techniques. Subject to limitations of non-PDF content, for example, movie files are something that you can add to a PDF, but that's something that we, as PDF people who wrote the PDF UA standard, we know nothing about movies. So all we required in movies is that you have to include, in PDF syntax terms, you need to include some text that describes the movie file that you've inserted. What we do not do is attempt to write a standard for accessible movies. that's up to, we are entirely delighted in PDF UA that you use the applicable standard for the technology that you're actually looking at the time. There is a document under development mapping PDF UA to WCAG 2.0, which will assist developers who have WCAG obligations in their PDF development. That's a straightforward table that simply says, here are the success criteria for WCAG, and here are the relevant subsections in PDF UA, and you can literally map one to the other, and to the extent that WCAG is specific enough to be understood in PDF terms, you can understand how it is you need to go about WCAG obligations when you're looking at PDF. All right, I'm going to give you a fast introduction to universally accessible PDF. ISO 14289-1:2012. That's assuming that ISO does actually let it out this year. I don't see any reason that they wouldn't. Some key terms. In PDF, tags denote logical reading order and semantics. That is so and these are logical reading order and semantics are probably the two key questions in PDF. These are things that you can assume for free in HTML. One of the great glories of HTML is that characteristically the content just happens in the right order, because that's what it is. You can screw that up with CSS, but in general, HTML content just occurs in the order in which it's intended to be consumed. In addition, the semantics are literally defined right there in the HTML. A heading tag, a paragraph tag, a table. Those are the semantic elements. Those are semantic indicators, and they're, of course, intrinsic to HTML. However, PDF is not quite that simple. Unless the content in a PDF is tagged, there is no logical reading order associated with that content. The technology that reads the PDF really has no proper idea of how to represent that content to the user. Unless it's tagged, PDF content has no semantics. There's no sense of headings or paragraphs or tables or lists and so on. If you just add tags, however, if you just slap them onto the PDF file, that wouldn't be enough. After all, if we don't know too much about how to read the document, just arbitrarily adding tags to it is not going to improve the state of affairs. The tagging has to be correct, and that introduces a number of complexities. PDF also has a concept of artifacts, which is to say objects on the page which do not contribute to the content of the page, and thus must be represented and understood in different ways. Examples of artifacts would include running headers, page numbers, somewhat controversially, purely decorative images, background images, and rule lines, and so forth. These are not elements of content. Lastly, in our key terms, assistive technology is a term that PDF developers don't often hear about. It is a class of technologies. It includes, for example, the screen reader you were just recently hearing. There are various assistive technologies directed at various kinds of disabilities. There are systems designed for low vision users, users who need assistance with low or high contrast situations in pages, who have motor disabilities that don't permit them to interact with, for example, a mouse. They need to use a joystick or something else like this. Zooming functions, refreshable braille readers. There's a wide variety of assistive technology to meet a wide variety of disabilities. And generally speaking, what needs to happen in a document format that claims to be accessible is it has to be able to operate with all of these. So, preview of ISO 14289. Well, here it is. It's on screen right now. As I mentioned, it will be inaccessible, and indeed, this is just a bitmap. You can't see anything. I know that. So I just thought I'd give you a quick breakdown of how this thing looks. There are the file format requirements. It's really not that long of a standard. It's not going to take you that long to read, and it's probably the most expensive. It's 86 francs for this document, and it's not a long document. So I'm not quite sure how they arrived at that price. Those are actually not all of the file requirements. If I add the font requirements, it actually kind of adds a couple more pages. Fonts are dealing with fonts and making sure that fonts and the glyphs and the Unicode mappings that occur from text are properly represented is actually a major component of the standard. There are, of course, also reader requirements, and they take up a couple more pages. And finally, for AT, we say, you know what? Assistive technology, in order to conform to PDF UA, has to be able to consume everything that we previously defined in this document. And those are the three major subsections of PDF UA. So I'll give you a brief introduction to the requirements, the sort of highlight requirements in each one of these subsections. In terms of PDF documents and forms, you must just, I'm going to read these for you, but or maybe I shouldn't. But broadly speaking, you need to distinguish between real and artifact content. We'll talk more about real content in a minute. Semantically appropriate tags in a logical reading order, as I've already mentioned. You shall not convey information by contrast or color or format or layout or combinations thereof unless you've also tagged that content. OCR text has to be corrected. It's not okay in PDF UA to just have machine output uncorrected OCR with all kinds of garbage characters in it inside of images and so on. You have to correctly zone it, correct it. Natural language shall be declared. That doesn't just mean at the document level. If you have a multilingual document, you need to declare language each time the content changes. So, for example, if you've got a word in French in the middle of a paragraph of English, you have to go ahead and modify that tag. Meaningful graphics, as opposed to non-real graphics, more about that later, shall include alternative text. Headings shall proceed in a valid sequence, and PDF UA defines a valid sequence as proceeding logically H1, H2, H3, and so on. H1, H3, H2 is not permitted in PDF UA, something that will drive web developers up a tree, perhaps. But, as I confirmed in my question at the end of the previous session, it actually would be of significant benefit to end users who rely upon heading levels in order to get effective navigation of a document, that they could rely, in fact, on an H2 or an H3 and really believe that that below an H3, they really will only find H4, H5, H6 content, and so on. It's particularly important for longer files. Embedded files in PDF are permitted in PDF UA. However, since you can embed arbitrary content in a PDF, and since we're only talking about PDF, we simply say, you know what, those things should be accessible, but we were not going to prohibit the attachment of files that were not accessible simply on that basis. Live Cycle Designer dynamic XFA forms are prohibited in PDF UA. It's one of the only features in ISO 32000 that are not permitted in PDF UA, and that boils down to the simple lack of normative language available to the committee in order to provide the description for a normative description for ISO standards, ISO purposes. Annotations, they have to be tagged correctly, and those annotations must be located in the logical structure. Media clips, scripts, there are other more esoteric capability in PDF also have to be handled correctly in PDF syntax terms. For PDF readers, they must process all structure types and attributes. They must make their artifacts available to AT. So it's possible for an AT user to query that page to find out what artifacts are on that page, in fact, even though those artifacts are not included in the logical structure of the document. A reader shall not interfere with any AT feature. It should announce visible or focus changes from actions. In other words, if you click on something and it takes you to another page, that has to be announced to the AT user. Navigation must be provided via page labels, structure, and bookmarks, multiple means of navigation into the document. And as I've already mentioned, heading levels, PDF UA is actually very strict about heading levels. I'm actually in a little debate right now with somebody else in Canada as to whether or not WCAG requires strictness in heading levels. I believe it can be read as to require that, but I'm getting some pushback on that, and I'm interested to hear more from others who might have some opinions. Alternative descriptions for annotations. Form fields must be fully processed. Every aspect of a form field, its value, its state, its role, its type, all these features must be capable of being represented to the AT user. Assistive technology, as I previously said, essentially you have to be able to process everything that that we've insisted is provided in a PDF UA document. You have to be able to accommodate the navigation features of PDF, such as navigating by physical page number via page labels, via structure, the structure hierarchy of tags, and outlines as well, bookmarks, which are a separate feature, a navigation feature. And navigation zoom values, the user should be able to set their own zoom value. Many times a given link within a PDF file will cause, for example, a fit page or a fit width aspect in the user. A low vision user can be extremely frustrated by this circumstance when what they needed to see for a given document was, say, I don't know, 300%. Okay, there are, as I've said, 3 major sections in PDF UA. They talk about file conformance, the reader conformance, and AT conformance. I'm going to give you, let's talk a little bit about the file. Let's start off with a nice, simple page. So what is real? Okay, how do you define real? It's an interesting question. And, oh, who is that? Let's look at that simple page again. Well, I haven't shown you the simple page yet, but here it is. Wow, it looks kind of squished on my screen. It looks a little more normal there. So this is a page that actually Olaf sent me this page and suggested that maybe okay. Now there's a gray background that's not helping us out here. That this page might be a good example of how to present some of these issues. And indeed, I looked at it and I agreed. It absolutely was a great example. So we're going to use it. Hope Laura Tech doesn't mind too much. So first of all, what is real? Well, I've now outlined the blocks, the areas on the page which represent the real content of the page. It's real because it actually is the content that would show up in the logical reading order of this document if you're reading it from one end to the other. You would not, for example, read the unreal content. What is the unreal content? Well, there's some information in the page header, and there's some information in the page footer. And if you imagine yourself reading from page to page to page in a document, this is the stuff that you would not want to encounter when you turned the page. You would not want to be reading through a sentence and then be interrupted by a page number and the name of the document, which is what you'll see in the footer here. So these items are to be ignored, and they're to be left out. They're to be made artifacts in this particular document. Okay, so what else is real in this document? Well, there are questions. Even so, for many the page number is real content. It's in PDF UA. We actually say no. The page number is actually an artifact. It's something that's mechanically produced by the software that authored the document. And the page number, the physical page number, should be represented in the page label of the PDF file. Now the second arrow that I put up there, I can't really be. What is it pointing at, Duff? Well, it's pointing at a gray background to the second block of content down here, and it's a graphics object on the page, and it's a fair question: is it a real piece of content? Once on the page, and so somebody has to make a decision about whether or not it's real. There's another arrow that points to a little tiny block that occurs at the end of the article. That's at the top half of this page. I'm pointing to that because, again, another graphics object, and that means somebody has to make a decision. Is it real content or is it an artifact? I can see arguments both ways. After all, this little block represents the end of the article. So I can certainly imagine a useful case where I would add alt text to that little block saying end of article, because that would give it equivalent utility to the user. Now, we'll get into the fact that the little block isn't actually appearing at the end of the article text in a minute. Okay, so there are a number of let's talk about how many images there are on this page, because it's yet another question that one's going to have to encounter and deal with as an implementer who's thinking about how they're going to handle this page. How many images do you see? Well, there's clearly one. There's a logo, and here's, I guess, another image. We'll talk more about that in a second. There's another image there, a screenshot of a dialogue, another screenshot of a dialogue, and of course there's that nasty little end of article image over there. I wonder what it's doing. Do we call it an image or is it an artifact? We'll have to figure that out. Now let's have a closer look at this one document down here, at this one image down here. Turns out that there are a couple little photographs inside this document. Are they images? I don't know. Then you could look at it slightly differently. You could say, well, clearly those images are components of a larger image, but I'm really not sure. Maybe this is two images that are connected in some logical sense. Maybe these are the images. Well, or is it just one image? There are, this is a decision, and you can imagine why this is the kind of decision that you'd really quite prefer that that you get a little heuristic help from the end user, from the author on this point. For this, in this case, is this one image? It is. I would suggest to you it is a single image. That the entire description of this image needs to be bundled up into a single case. PDF UA actually provides the images that are composed of components that only have. Well, the way PDF UA puts it is that if an image only has meaning in connection with when it's grouped with other images, then all of those image components have to be sitting under a single figure tag. And so that's one way in which PDF UA helps you understand that this is probably best represented as a single image rather than multiple. But it's not obvious necessarily because indeed there are lots of images going on in any given section. What if this page is scanned? Is it now only one image for the whole page? After all, the image is now, we're not in the business of logical images anymore, right? Now we're looking at an actual factual image which is representing the entire page. That's an interesting challenge. How you scan that page might also make a difference. And what I've shown is the previous slide showed a grayscale scan of the page. Now I'm showing a bitonal scan of the page. The gray background dropped out behind the second article, and the images and also the images are destroyed in this little section down here. This can make a significant difference. It's possible a bitonal scan actually often tends to dumb down an image. It tends to remove contrast or color as a means of displaying information. Of course, that's information that's lost for users who can perceive it, who could perceive it if it was present as well. But nonetheless, in the cause of making something accessible, that is oftentimes the price that is being paid. So let's go back to the grayscale page here, the grayscale scan. And I'm going to suggest to you that when you need to do PDF UA right, you need to segment the scanned image. You need to first of all identify those objects on the page which are not real content, so you can exclude them from the tag structure. What did it not do? Okay, then you need to having identified your images, you need to make sure, you need to know whether or not you've got image captions here. In this case, on this page, we have captions for 2 of our images. We've got to distinguish, but take a look, those captions, you could be readily fooled into thinking that they occur in inline text with the rest of the document. And in fact, and PDF UA has rules for this. If an image has caption, it must be in a caption tag, and that caption tag must be associated with the figure. So it's not okay to just allow a caption to fall in line with text in PDF UA. Has this been painful enough for you yet? Probably it has been. Let's talk a little bit about how developers should think about PDF accessibility. First of all, for those producing PDF writers. How am I doing on time here? I'm taking up some time. First and foremost, if you're developing a PDF writer, you should think about sequencing content streams from the logical structure viewpoint, and you need to think outside the page when you do so. It's ideal to have content streams that align themselves with the logical structure of a page, because not all consuming software is capable of reading tags. That's the case today. That'll be the case tomorrow. Hopefully it won't be the case in 2 years from now, but it's something that needs to be accounted for. We need to prompt the user to specify semantic relationships. If your software is a word processor and you've noticed that somebody's written a document that includes all kinds of different font usage, large fonts, little fonts, stuff that happens in paragraphs, stuff that happens in single lines, that user is and if there are no if the only differences are fonts, and if there's no semantic information, if no heading levels have been provided, if no lists are present, if tables have been executed by way of using the tab character, using tab stops instead of actually presenting a proper table, you need to prompt that user to specify the actual semantics going on. It's not enough to simply rely upon the font characteristics and hope that semantics can be understood from those fonts. That's, after all, not the way in which the document can be consumed by an AT user. The user must be prompted to validate alternative text on their images. In PDF UA, every content image needs to have descriptive alternate text, and there's another long discussion that could be entered into what constitutes decent alternative text. It's a subject for another time. Fonts and character encoding in a PDF UA file that you're going to generate are more or less based on PDFA standards for fonts. In fact, we more or less copied the font-related content from the PDFA standard wholesale for the purposes of PDF UA. And what it boils down to is ensuring that your fonts are properly encoded and that you have correct Unicode mappings so that every glyph can be properly represented when it's extracted from the document. If you're scanning and you're intending to produce PDF UA files, you need to plan for image segmentation so you can generate logical images instead of this single page image. You need to plan for OCR and for OCR cleanup, because it's normatively required in the standard. And all that work has to happen before you even start thinking about the tags. You have to respect the limits of automated verification. End users will know if you fail to do this. If you come up with some algorithm to magically, deterministically figure out what the logical reading order is on generic PDF files, I guarantee you that very, very soon you'll run into a PDF file that will blow your algorithm away. It's in the nature of PDF that all kinds of arbitrary content is one of the great values of PDF from the point of view of an electronic document format is that it can accommodate arbitrary content. It can take a bill from a utility company, a piece of legislation, something that comes out of a Illustrator, something that comes from a CAD file. All kinds of content can come out of a PDF, and there are substantial limits on the ability on verification software to address accessibility in these items. Is the alternative text adequate? I don't know. Is a document that has 5 columns where the text on that page skips over other pages skips to page 6 after it leaves page 1? How do you automatically verify that? And these are all things that characteristically these days require human validation in order to ascertain whether or not they're the case. And in fact, in the example in the previous segment, we noticed the report from the PDF Accessibility Checker, which, by the way, NetCentric is very pleased and proud to be supporting the development of the PDF Accessibility Checker. We think it's a valuable piece of software, and the more the world gets to understand the limitations of their PDF files, we think the better. But right there, you saw a couple of warnings in the checker regarding, for example, contrast issues, because there's no decent way for software to deterministically figure out whether or not the potential for contrast concerns has been adequately met in a given file. That's something for a human to take a look at and review, sign off on. What do readers have to do? You have to, well, I would propose to you that you do not, if you're implementing a reader for PDF and you want to be UA conforming or even just do a good job for accessibility, don't implement reflow based on content order, which is as strongly implied in the ISO 32000 Part 1 standard. ISO 32000 Part 2 has been corrected to make it very clear that when you are performing the activity of reflowing content, for example, when you're extracting text for a copy and paste function or for reuse in HTML, that you should use tags, and that the content order, the utility of content order, is limited to the occurring within text runs, and that's where content order is significant and substantial. Yes, Bill.
Question. I thought we heard earlier that 99% of the PDFs didn't have tags.
True.
So in that case, what is one to do?
Tag them.
No, you're the reader. You're the PDF reader. You just mentioned if you're implementing PDF reader. So you get a PDF without tags.
There's no good solution to that.
Well, that's what is the recommended solution.
You impute the tags.
From reading order, perhaps.
No, well, maybe in part from reading order, but reading order can't give you any real clues to whether or not you can't correctly give you a sense of how to impute tags. Reading order can't tell you, for example, about a heading versus a paragraph that follows it. If the document laid down, and Matthew's going to talk about this significantly in his presentation, but for example, the reading order might lay down all the serif fonts first in the document. Then it might come around and lay down all the sans serif fonts after it's laid down all the serif. There are no useful clues in that content order to help you tag the document. Instead, the reader would have to analyze the document as is, after everything's been rendered, and attempt to analyze it for example, font size, text positioning, and so on, in order to take a view about what the tags would have been had it been properly tagged.
So like gutter detection by the geometry, not by order of rendering.
Precisely. The order of rendering does not matter except within the text run. And then the reason it matters within the text run is because that's the smallest object that gets tagged for the purposes of implementing the logical reading order. But as I wrote in an article that seems to be relatively popular out there, once upon a time, the order in which the content is written to the page doesn't matter any more than it matters in the order in which Monet painted his water lilies. You don't care if he painted them from the outside in, the inside out, from the bottom to the top, or any of it. Well, you see your water lilies. Is Monet the guy who did water lilies? Moving on.
Can I just add one little thing?
Yes.
Which is the reflow algorithm that that's referring to is actually part of the tag PDF specification. So the 32000 Part 1 doesn't try to define reflow for arbitrary PDF documents, or for tag PDF.
So the 99% of the cases, that's only there's no algorithm defined.
No, and there can't be. Which I think is just the point, which is that, and one of the reasons in 32,000 Part 2 is we want rid of this. We want to say, use the actual semantics and logical structure. Don't try to impute it from some.
Right. Well, I don't want to sidetrack this, but there's at least one reading system I'm aware of from a particular vendor who's very hospitable, that designed for mobile devices and things like the ebook readers and things like that. And that vendor software found experimentally that tags were often incorrect.
Right.
And in fact threw away and
that vendor has been spoken to, and that vendor has acknowledged the error of their ways, and will may be changing their ways
to potentially give worse results. Because they did this not in order to improve the observed experimental results.
They took a view, and how do I put this? They did what they thought was the right thing to do at the time. It turns out it wasn't the right thing to do.
Fair enough.
And now they understand that.
The person responsible for the management decision has already been dealt with severely. So.
Oh, I don't know. I wouldn't know about anything like that. But yes, but I think the point here, and it's really worth emphasizing, is that imputing the tags from the content order is to rely upon luck, because the fundamental reality is that the content is laid down in the order in which it was convenient for the PDF writing software to write it. Nobody ever told the guys writing the PDF writing software, or if they were told, then they were to a degree in ISO 32000, but they didn't pay any attention. They wrote PDF files, and all of them did this according to the needs of the situation. Well, today, with this particular PDF file, the nature of it is such that we're going to write all text, and then we're going to write all the images to the page. Okay, that's great. That might make a lot of sense for efficiencies or generating a print stream or whatever it is. But does it actually inform you with any information about the logical order? It does not. So the crucial thing to understand is that if you're going to attempt to do the right thing with an untagged PDF, is that you let that sucker render and then analyze the finished render, and that's your best chance of getting to somewhere useful in terms of understanding the actual document's logical structure, as opposed to hoping that the content order happened to be laid down in something that looks more or less like the logical order. You look like you want to say something, Matthew.
No.
Okay. The simplest way to think about correct logical structure, and this is something you could see and we saw this demonstrated earlier, is the idea very simply that based upon the tags, how would this document look exported to HTML? And that's something that the PDF accessibility checker and NetCentrix checker also, it takes that kind of perspective on the problem. Artifacts are not irrelevant to the document. They're not irrelevant to accessibility either. They're simply distinct from document content, and that's something that needs to be reflected in a reader and understood there. So, for example, if you're going to, it might be, I'm going to move on for the moment because it's a relatively minor point, and I've got a lot more slides. Logical structure allows for rich, as I've said, respecting logical structure gives reader developers a lot of interesting things that they could do with a PDF file. There are rich potential for navigation of content, for selection, for extraction, localization of content. Be possible to do things like translate PDF files on the fly if you can understand their tag, if they're properly tagged. You can analyze the content of a PDF file far more efficiently and effectively. Operate a search engine far more efficiently and effectively if you could understand tags. There's lots of things for a reader to do, so go for it and enjoy it and have a good time. Okay, so what's really important? All real content must be represented in the logical structure tree, first and foremost. If there's real content in that PDF, and as distinguished from artifacts, if it's not represented in the logical structure tree, you're really missing out. More importantly, your AT user is definitely missing out from a universally accessible experience of the document. Each node in that tag tree must be in correct logical order, which is to say not only must your content be tagged, but it must be tagged in a valid order. So it's not just one, but it's both. Those nodes in the tag tree must be tagged with correct semantics. And I didn't even get into the question of semantics when it came to looking at that page we were looking at earlier, but headings, tables, lists, and so on, these things have to be correctly semantically marked. Artifact content must be tagged as an artifact, but it's perhaps slightly unfortunate that the term is tagged in PDF, but since this is primarily a document for developers, it's probably survivable. Non-standard tags must be role mapped to standard tags. So it's okay that it's notionally okay that Microsoft Word and so on would allow you to specify styles. Duff's favorite style. Well, you can have Duff's favorite style as a tag type. You must map it, however, to a standard tag type. Fonts must include valid 2 Unicode entries. It must be always possible to understand what character it is, what characters we have on the page when we extract that content. Content images must always include alternative text. Annotations must be represented in the logical structure. Now, how do we explain all this stuff to the user? How do we deal with the user when they're encountering a file, when they're trying to do the right thing? Number one, we can simulate, if you're thinking about how to express the problems or the possibilities of tag content to the user, of the author, for example, you might simulate the classical test case for accessible electronic content, such as the use of software such as JAWS, Window Eyes, NVDA, software that is in fact alternative technology that can process PDF tags. It can be simulated in a variety of ways. You don't necessarily have to go ahead and license Freedom Scientific's engine and install it into your software. You could read aloud for the purposes of helping an author understand if they're doing the right thing. You could simply redeploy the content in HTML for them. You could read it to them out loud in tagged order instead of making the mistake of a certain popular implementation and reading it in content order. Preview in HTML is one way to implement the sort of a reflow model. It's a great way to explain to an end user whether or not they've got a chance of whether or not they're doing the right thing in their document. You might also display highlights on the page, indicating the content handling. You might, for example, if that user is trying to understand whether or not they've got a validly tagged PDF, you might highlight areas where you've got an artifact to indicate that this stuff will not be included in the logical order. You might indicate the sequence by, say, flashing lights on the content in the order in which it proceeds in the page. There are all kinds of possibilities for developing a tool that will give authors, not by the way necessarily AT authors, but authors, conventionally abled authors, will give them the tools necessary to readily understand how they can improve the accessibility of their PDF file. The author or the verifier of a given PDF file has inalienable responsibilities, which is an unfortunate term. What it really boils down to is that there are things that the author or the person validating the document just can't get away from, can't assume that that automation will help them with. Verifying the correct logical order is required. It's not some documents, novels that are simply paragraph after paragraph followed by the occasional heading. These things can be verified pretty much automatically. But more complicated documents, forms, heavily structured documents will typically require human validation. Content images include acceptable alternative text. That's, again, thus far, although there's actually significant progress, it's not yet the case that software is capable of analyzing an image and telling you whether or not the alternative text you've written for that image is actually good enough to properly describe that image. Verifying the valid uses of color and contrast and so forth in the document is also something that's extremely challenging for software at this time. The top 10 things to get right in order of priority if you're a developer, if you're implementing these things. Number one, oddly enough, if used, your document security must allow support for alternative technology. If you implement it with security but fail to allow for the possibility of extracting the tag content, AT users will not be able to use your document, even though you might have beautifully tagged it. If you're prohibiting access to the extracted content. Valid font encoding and Unicode mapping. The text has to be understandable. Structured PDF and a tag tree would be number 3. All real content, as I mentioned, referenced in the tag tree must be in correct logical order. You have to use form X objects correctly, and there's specific rules pertaining to that. Artifact content must be properly marked. Tags must use valid semantics. Images must include alternative text. Headings, as I previously mentioned, have to be valid. And language must be set at both the document, either at the document or at the tag level. You could add a language tag at the top of the tag tree. You could add language to the document, and then so long as you didn't have other languages occurring within the document. Rules, of course, must be followed for annotations, for media, for actions, and there are a variety of content-specific rules. So a little bit about going beyond PDF UA1. Future development. There are numerous improvements to the text of PDF UA1. All right. Updates. The document's going to be updated based upon experience in the field. We want to get UA out there, get some feedback from developers and from end users. There are a number of new features in PDF 2.0 that will contribute to the PDF UA2. Alternative text for artifacts, Bates numbers, a new algorithm to assist users figure out headings in tables that aren't otherwise perfectly tagged, support for line numbering, MathML, and a wide variety of new tags, including such things as admonition and continued list, abbreviation tags, strong and emphasis, which are unaccountably missing in PDF at this time, tags for sub and superscript, sidebar, callout, line number and group, and there are a number of different tags, a number of different features in ISO 32000 Part 2 that will be of assistance in PDF UA Part 2. We could use your help in developing this effort. If you live in one of these countries, you can be a part of the ISO 14289 development. And I'm guessing that most, well, I won't speculate, but many of you here do live in one or another of these countries. All the countries in the first two columns are members of are already members of TC 171 SC2. You merely need to sign up with your country's member body, and then you can participate directly in the standards development process, contribute comments to the standard, and help us develop it and improve it going forward. If you live in one of the observing countries, you can petition to join ISO TC 171 SC2 as a voting member. You can also, of course, contribute from those countries as well by way of comment. If you want to help, and I do help, and I hope you do, please join your country's delegation to ISO's TC 171 SC2. Join the in-person and teleconference meetings of the ISO committee. Join the PDF UA's Competence Center of the PDF UA Competence Center of the PDF Association. As it happens, and it's no coincidence, the first meeting of the first in-person meeting of the PDF UA Competence Center happens tomorrow, right here in Basel. For more information, I'd certainly invite you to visit both the PDF Association's website and the AIMS PDF Wiki, which is where the content development for PDF UA has all happened previously. And that is, I believe, about it. Thank you very much. I'm happy to take any questions you've got. Hey, who put that up there?
You scared them away.